Hello everyone, my name is Travel Ted and I'm a travelling bear. I live with my best friends Ben and Annie. I love Ben and Annie and Ben and Annie love me. Today I am going to tell you a story about making new friends. Mrs. Booker kissed us goodbye and said that she would see us all later at the school fete. Mrs. Booker had volunteered to help and had to be there early to help set up the tables and chairs and to help with some of the stalls. Mr. Booker said that we would go in his car a little while later. When we got to the fete, there were already lots of cars, and Mr. Booker drove up and down for ages looking for somewhere to park. We had to walk quite a long way in the end, but we didn't mind because it was a sunny day, and on the way we passed a paddock with horses in. We climbed up onto the metal gate and fed the horses with long strips of grass we had pulled from the ground. Annie and Ben's playground was very big. There was a place for playing football and a net for playing netball. On the ground there was a hopscotch game, and over in the corner there was a quiet area with little tables and benches. There was a big grass area, but I couldn't see much of it because it was covered with tables and stalls. Mrs. Booker was sitting at the gate, and when we went in we had to give her some money, and she gave us a little green ticket with a number on it. My number was 132, and as she passed it to me, she put another green ticket exactly the same into a big box. It even had the same number on it. Mrs. Booker explained that we should keep our tickets because at the end of the day there would be a raffle. She said that somebody would be chosen to put their hand into the big box of tickets and pick out a ticket with a number on it. She said that whoever had the same number on their ticket as the one picked out of the box would win a special prize. I folded my ticket carefully and put it in my pocket. The first table we looked at was filled with delicious cookies and cakes, and each cookie and cake had a name on it. Annie picked up a big cookie with chocolate chips in it and proudly showed it to Mr. Booker. "Look, Dad," she said, "I made this one." And Mr. Booker said that it really did look delicious, and he thought that it would be a good idea to buy it. He gave it to the lady with a £1 coin, and the lady wrapped it up. Annie said that the lady was called Mrs. Turner, and she was her teacher. She said that Mrs. Turner had helped her make the cookie by putting it into the oven and taking it out again. She did this because the oven was hot and Annie was too small to touch hot things. Mrs. Turner was very nice, and I wished that I went to school and had a teacher like that. At the next stall there were toys and games, and Ben bought a big shiny blue car with black wheels and a remote control. Further along there were more tables. Some had tasty sweets and cakes for sale, and some had games you could play. My favourite game was the plate smashing game. There were lots of plates standing up against a wooden wall, and Ben, Annie and I had 3 balls each. We took it in turns to throw the balls and smash the plates. They smashed and they crashed. Crash! And I thought how glad Mrs. Booker would be that we didn't do that in her kitchen. Next, we went to a table with a bear sitting on it. "I want the bear!" Ben shouted as he ran over to the table. "I want the bear too!" Annie shouted as she ran after him, dragging me along with her by the arm. The bear was sitting on a table, and when I looked at it, I couldn't see why Ben and Annie liked it so much. It was very boring and looked like every other bear I had ever seen. It didn't do any tricks, it didn't have any clothes on, and it couldn't even blink. I told Annie and Ben that it was a rubbish bear, and Mr. Booker said that I wasn't being very nice. He said that I was jealous, and Annie and Ben shook their heads at me. I waited for ages and ages while Annie and Ben guessed the bear's name, and I was very bored. The lady behind the table wrote the names they guessed in a little book. Annie guessed Barney, and Ben guessed Everywhere. They're silly names, I thought. They'll never win with those. At the next table, there was a game with lots of straws sticking out of holes in a box. We took it in turn to pull the straws out. Ben's straw was very short, and my straw was very short too, but when Annie picked hers, it was long, and she won a lollipop. Ben and I wanted to share the lollipop, but Mr. Booker said no, that we were not allowed because it wasn't hygienic to do that. On another table there were sweets and drinks and prizes with little tickets on, like the ones we were given at the gate. and I checked my pocket to make sure that mine was still there. Luckily, it was. There was a big box at the side of the table, and we took it in turns to pick out a ticket. Mr. Booker said that we had to look on the table and see if any of the prizes had the same number as the ticket we had picked out, but they didn't. Mr. Booker had a go, and the number he picked out was the same as one stuck onto a bottle of wine. The lady at the table said Mr. Booker had won and gave him the bottle of wine. Mr. Booker was very pleased. We spent all day walking around the stalls, buying cakes and sweets and playing with toys. We had a burger and a drink from the burger store, and Mr. Booker had a beer in the beer tent while we played on the bouncy castle. Annie and Ben had to take off their shoes and line them up at the edge of the castle. It was hard to walk on the bouncy castle, and Ben and Annie and I all laughed as we bounced up and down and landed in piles on the floor. Splat! We fell over a lot, but it didn't hurt because the bouncy castle was very soft. Mrs. Booker had finished at the gate and came to call us. She said that they were going to announce the winner of the Guess the Bear's Name game. I wanted to stay on the bouncy castle, but Ben and Annie got off. Over at the Guess the Bear table, the lady said that the name of the bear was everywhere, and Ben jumped up and down with excitement as he went to collect him. Annie jumped up and down too, and I sat with my arms folded, looking the other way. We don't need another bear, I thought. Where will he sleep? Ben brought the Everywhere Bear over and pushed him in front of my face. "Meet Everywhere Bear," he said. But I didn't say hello, and I didn't look at him either. "That isn't nice, Travel Ted," Annie said. "You've made Everywhere Bear sad now." But I didn't care. It was almost time to go home, and Annie's teacher, Mrs. Turner, used the big microphone to call everyone over to the raffle table. Annie, Ben, and Everywhere Bear were excited, but I kept my arms folded. Then I saw the prize. It was the biggest, most enormously massive and giant jar of jelly sweets I had ever seen. I don't know if you know this, but travel bears love jelly sweets. My mouth was watering at the sight of so many jelly sweets in one jar. A little girl went up to the table and pulled out a ticket. Annie's teacher read the number. "Green 132, she said, but nobody answered. Then she read it again. "Green 132, and I jumped up. "That's my number, that's my number," I shouted. But when I looked for my ticket, it was completely gone. We looked everywhere. We looked under the tables. We looked under the stalls. We looked on the football pitch, and we looked on the grass, but we couldn't find it anywhere. The lady said they would have to pick the ticket again, but just then Ben and Everywhere Bear came running over, puffing and panting, and their faces were red with excitement. I found it, Everywhere Bear cried. "It was on the bouncy castle," he said as he handed me the ticket and patted me on the back. I went up to collect my jar of jelly sweets, and as I looked back, I could see Everywhere Bear clapping and smiling at me. He looked so pleased for me that I felt guilty that I had been so mean about him earlier. That night, we all played together, and at the end of the night, Annie climbed into bed and tucked me under her arm. Ben took Everywhere Bear and put him on the pillow next to him. Perhaps Everywhere Bear is not so bad after all, I thought, as he winked at me and said goodnight. So if one of your friends makes a new friend, don't be jealous, and don't feel like you are losing a friend, because if you are nice and you play together, you might just find that you end up with two friends instead.